This video is brought to you by my Patreon subscribers. Thank you for your support.
And the Little Mermaid used to sing, "Up where they walk, up where they run." Now she might sing, "Up where they woke."
So, the anti-woke Disney crusade continues.
And I think Disney has always viewed itself as being exempt from that constitutional process. Well, those days are over.
And the upcoming Little Mermaid remake is allegedly part of Disney's woke agenda. Actress Halle Bailey has gotten a lot of racist hate for playing Ariel, and in the last week or so, people have been incredibly upset about some lyrics that were changed. We do not consent to these modifications. Woke-ass Disney. Seriously, this is totally beyond out of control. So, people are angry about these new lyrics. Let's talk about what was changed. In a recent interview with Vanity Fair, composer Alan Menken, who's working on the music for the remake with Lin-Manuel Miranda, said that 2 songs would be different in the new movie. There are some lyric changes in Kiss the Girl because people have gotten very sensitive about the idea that Prince Eric would, in any way, force himself on Ariel. We have some revisions in Poor Unfortunate Souls regarding lines that might make young girls somehow feel that they shouldn't speak out of turn, even though Ursula is clearly manipulating Ariel to give up her voice. We don't have updated lyrics yet, but it seems obvious what he's referring to in Kiss the Girl.
Yes, you want her. Look at her, you know you do. Possible she wants you to. There is one way to ask her. It don't take a word, not a single word. Go on and kiss the girl.
People are upset about these changes, but let's drop the anti-woke Disney nonsense. To be honest, when I heard the news, I was pretty surprised. But I think there's an interesting discussion here about what Disney and fairy tales represent. So let's look at that history. For most of their history, if Disney showed romantic relationships, they were exclusively heterosexual, and they often made adaptations of fairy tales that reinforced quote-unquote traditional gender roles. Of course, that wasn't uncommon, but as Disney got more success and became a pillar of US American culture, their depictions of love, marriage, and gender roles took center stage. Disney's portrayal of women has changed throughout the years, and like many things with the company, it's complicated and has many sides to it. But a lot of people see the Disney Renaissance films of the late 80s and 90s as a turning point, when a new formula was set that usually featured empowered women who often didn't take passive roles in their stories.
How dare you? Standing around deciding my future? I am not a prize to be won.
But that didn't really stop criticisms of the company's portrayal of women. In the early 2000s and 2010s, there were plenty of accusations of Beauty and the Beast being about Stockholm Syndrome, and Ariel just giving up her voice for a boy. And for many people, Disney stories still represented harmful gender roles. The company continued focusing on films with empowered, driven women who also fell in love. And then there were films that didn't even have traditional romantic relationships at the center. And like some of the Renaissance films, some even poked fun at the Disney format.
You mean to tell me you got engaged to someone you just met that day?
And while feminism's presence in mainstream US culture continued to grow, Disney was also strengthening the Disney Princess brand and incorporating the new characters and stories into that as well. Which brings us to the current wave of live-action remakes, which often make a point of critiquing their source material. For example, by adding things, so characters like Belle and Jasmine are 100% definitely feminist, as if they weren't already before. And when talking about the live-action remake of The Little Mermaid, Halle Bailey said that the new version changed that perspective of just Ariel wanting to leave the ocean for a boy. She later said that she didn't mean that the film was only about that, and that they were just bringing out other aspects of the story. But it reminded me a lot of the criticisms I mentioned earlier, and honestly, it brings up a good question. Is Little Mermaid even about Ariel giving up her voice for a boy? That's where this gets interesting, because I don't really think so, but there are 2 different ways that you can approach it. On one hand, Ariel is clearly interested in the human world, and falling in love with Eric becomes a way to get there. That doesn't mean that she doesn't love him, but her falling in love with him is like a validation of her feelings about wanting to be human. And we can hear this in the music as well. Part of Your World focuses on Ariel's huge collection of human artifacts, but also her deep fascination with how humans behave and how their world works, and how she really wants to be a human. And when she falls in love with Eric, her love for him is contextualized within that. The first half of the Part of Your World reprise focuses on her growing love for him, how she wants to be with him, but then the second half focuses on the vague longing of something happening.
What would I give to live where you are? What would I pay to stay here beside you? I don't know when
don't know how, but I know something's starting right now.
This is a story about self-actualization that also has love in it. The other way to think about it is to ask whether or not the point of The Little Mermaid is even to depict heterosexual patriarchal relationships in the first place. Hans Christian Andersen reportedly wrote the original story after hearing that a man he had feelings for had gotten engaged to a woman. What Andersen meant in his letters to that man is debated, but it's generally thought of to have been some expression of queerness. From this perspective, the original Little Mermaid becomes a heartbreaking story of unrequited love that was written during a time where he couldn't say his feelings directly. And I don't think that just because Disney replaced the tragic ending with a happy one, the narrative or the depiction of mermaids' transformation and aspiring to self-realization doesn't automatically lose its queer context. And of course the movie shows a heterosexual relationship, but I think summarizing its message as only being about that is missing the point. Just like the original, the Disney movie is ultimately a fairy tale. While it might be easy to relate to, that doesn't mean it's supposed to be taken literally. So, do the lyrics to Kiss the Girl show that Eric does not care about consent? If you want to take it entirely out of context, maybe. But they're on a date, Ariel tries to kiss him as well, and Sebastian, who's singing the song, knows that she's both falling in love with Eric and also needs true love's kiss to remain human and not belong to Ursula. And maybe the lyrics don't need to consider anything outside of that specific situation. In her article, What Princesses Want, A Fable, Jenny Nicholson looks at critiques of Disney princesses, in particular, Kristen Bell's questions to her children about Snow White's messages, and her implication that the film doesn't care about consent because the prince kisses Snow White while she's asleep. If Belle really wants her children to think critically about the literal events of these stories, she ought to be traumatizing her 5- and 3-year-old daughters with such nuanced ethical questions as, is it okay for a prince to kiss a woman's dead enchanted body at her wake if her next of kin are there and have given him their blessing? What if there's tongue? Like, that makes it weirder, right? But what if it's part of the prince's grieving process? Like, as far as we know, she'll never come back to life, so whose needs take precedence in that situation? The dwarves gave their blessing, and they're watching. But does that make it okay? Or at this point, does it make the whole thing weirder? What I'm getting at is that fairy tales often involve bizarre and unrealistic situations with no clear one-to-one correlations to real-life experiences. Especially the further back you go, fairy tales tend to be a collection of bizarre and unrelatable events in service of one hyper-specific lesson. Like how Pinocchio is a carnival of fear, vaguely in support of the idea of being a good boy. Still, asking reading comprehension questions at the end of a storytime session is a good practice. Ironically, Belle is teaching her daughters the same lesson the evil queen taught Snow White. Don't take everything at face value. Think about what people tell you. So, is Eric being pressured to force himself on Ariel? I don't think so. The context is pretty clear. But I guess I could only say for sure when I am also being sung to by a talking crab on a date while he's trying to help a princess avoid being taken captive by a sea witch. I have no issues with one of the original writers of the song wanting to make the message clearer or even just try something new. I also think that, regarding Howard Ashman's original lyrics, if there's anyone qualified to make a judgment about what is or isn't respectful to his legacy, it's Alan Menken, his main collaborator. But what's most interesting to me is that it seems like he himself was hesitant about the changes, making me wonder where they even came from. Because when talking about the changes to Poor Unfortunate Souls, he references that the lyrics were changed even though Ursula is clearly manipulating Ariel. It seems like he was referring to the lines about men on land not liking women who talk. It's she who holds her tongue who gets her man. But Ursula is the villain, and she's trying to convince Ariel that voices are not that important. I don't think that those lines are essential for understanding the song, but changing them brings up an important question. Just how evil are villains allowed to be? As society changes, so will the stories being told, and Disney has been changing fairy tales to fit their format since the beginning, so they won't be stopping anytime soon. I might disagree with the lyrical changes, but I also don't really have an issue with them. I've always been interested in how Disney as a company has changed throughout the years and responded to their own history, so it's interesting to see how they are continuing to shape what they represent. Who knows how the live-action remakes will fit within Disney's legacy in the future? But right now, I'm open to just seeing them for what they are. New interpretations of classic stories that reimagine beloved characters and songs. And from what we've seen and heard so far, I'm really looking forward to this one, which is something I honestly couldn't ever say about the others. Since the original story was written, The Little Mermaid has meant so many different things to so many people. And Alan Menken understands this.
I consider myself like an architect. I'm building a house that others will live in. Many others, and they'll live in it differently.
So I guess they're just making some renovations. I don't know when, I don't know how, but I know something's starting right now. Watch and you'll see.